Our guest this morning is Martin Sherman, who is the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He served for 7 years in operational capabilities in the Israel Defense Establishment, ministerial advisor to Yitzhak Shamir government, and lectured for 20 years at Tel Aviv University in political science. He was born in South Africa and has lived in Israel since 1971. He was the first academic director of the internationally renowned Herzliya Conference and is the author of 2 books, probably more numerous articles, and policy papers on a wide range of political, diplomatic, and security issues. Martin, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Okay. So there's a million issues that you are heading up and many that are in other areas, but I would like to concentrate this morning on the fact that is Europe beginning to forget the Holocaust?
Well, I'm sure it's very faded memory in most people's minds in Europe. I certainly don't think that it's a thought that's foremost in most of the public's mind, and certainly with the new wave of income or newcomers from basically Muslim countries, which are becoming a more and more significant minority there. I don't think the Holocaust has any impact. So I certainly think that overall it's a fading memory, certainly.
Well, Vice President Pence spoke at the ceremony marking the start of World War II. How can anybody forget, Martin, what went on in the Second World War? It just seems to me that it's an impossible thing to forget and to want to forget.
Well, I think there's a big difference between formal ceremonies and commemoration and actually having something that is near to a real-life experience. I mean, the war now has been over for well over half a century, and so it's difficult to keep it. It's difficult to keep it alive as a tangible occurrence. It's very difficult. I mean, people do keep it, do commemorate it across the world, but as far as a real experience, I think it's far from most of Western Europe, which hasn't seen much violence, let's say, for over half a century. And certainly from the Jewish point of view, I think it's becoming a faded experience.
Well, if that memory fades, I don't know whether it's possible to happen again, but anti-Semitism seemingly is growing in numbers, both in Europe and other parts of the world. Belgium has now a ban on kosher slaughter, which has gone into effect. So it seems to me the memory of 6 million Jews and others that were slaughtered, I don't know how that can be forgotten.
No, look, I agree with you that it was a momentous tragedy. But as it impacts on people's daily lives, I don't think it's something that people think about actively. I think that, I don't want to diminish the seriousness of the outbreak of anti-Semitism across the world. But in many ways, anti-Jewishness is becoming enmeshed with anti-Israeliness, and I think Israel has done a very poor job in promoting itself in the world, on the world stage, and I think Israel could have done much more in projecting a much more positive image of itself, and therefore being on the cutting edge of fighting this anti-Semitism, which I say is beginning to be confused and blurred with anti-Israelism.
So do you think that people who seemingly are saying, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Israel, don't you think that is the message is one and the same?
I think in many cases it is the same. I mean, in many ways, anti-Zionism has taken the place of anti-Semitism, whereby instead of hating the Jewish individual, they're hating the Jewish state. I certainly think so. I'm not sure that it's 100% coincidence, but I certainly think that Israel has become a convenient target for anti-Semitism. And again, as I say, I'm not trying to belittle the seriousness of it, because I'm sure there's a hard core of anti-Zionism / anti-Semitism that's very difficult to eradicate. But I think, in many ways, I think anti-Semitism is driven by at least three things: malice, envy, and ignorance. And it's not always easy to deal with the malice and the envy, but there's certainly something that could be done about the ignorance. And I think Israel has done a poor job in trying to dispel the ignorance. I think it's spent miserly amounts of resources on presenting its case to the world, explaining what Israel is all about, explaining Israel's importance to humanity. And, as I say,
we try to do this. We try to do that on this program all the time, talk about all the incredible things that Israel has done. But you're right. I think that Israel is busy taking care of business, and they don't take care of the PR that probably would make a difference. Now, is Israel right now in a situation, Martin, where they are threatened to a greater degree by Iran?
Oh, I certainly think so. I think, Iran has got its back to the wall. I think that Iran is becoming a bit desperate. They have a deteriorating situation at home. Their foreign adventurism is becoming more and more exorbitant and difficult to maintain. So I think there is a certain amount of desperation in the Iranian behavior pattern.
Why do you think, I've asked this question of so many people, why do you think Iran has such ill feelings toward Israel and continues to say in much of their rhetoric, not the Iranian people, but the mullahs, that they want to destroy Israel? What is it about Israel that is so threatening to Iran?
Well, it's basically, as you said, it's not Iran, it's more the regime, because if you remember back up until the 1970s, Israel and Iran were very close allies. El Al had multiple flights to Tehran. Israeli construction companies were very much involved there. So it's part of this Iranian DNA. It's some sort of, I'm not an expert on Islam and don't know all that much about the Shia-Sunni divide, but it's certainly something within their religious doctrine that makes them so inimical towards the Jewish control of what they see as Muslim land. And if you were to eliminate the animus towards Israel, towards Iran, you would eliminate a large part of their raison d'etre.
Well, I can't believe a hate could go that deep, but apparently it does. And I think probably Iran feels threatened by Israel, small little Israel that's able to frighten people in certain areas. Now, what about some of the what happened to Lebanon, Martin? There used to be a very close relationship between Lebanon and Israel. And whenever they have a new leadership that changes the course of history in the long run.
Well, what happened in Lebanon is basically an extension of what happened in Iran. You have an Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, who, for all intents and purposes, controls Lebanon. And that again explains why Lebanon has become so anti-Israel. I'm not sure that Iran, as you said before, that Iran is frightened of Israel. I think it uses Israel as an excuse for much of its foreign adventurism. As you can see, Iranian tentacles in places like Yemen and elsewhere in the world. So they basically have an expansionist ideology to spread their version of Islam, when the existence of the Jewish control over the Holy Land is inconsistent with that doctrine. But Lebanon, what's happened in Lebanon is a direct result of what happened in Iran, and you can see, even despite the fact that Hamas belong to the Sunni sect, you can see the footprints of Iran in Gaza and well in the south.
Well, you also now have Turkey to implement Northeast Syria plan unless control safe zone within weeks. You have Erdogan, you have Lebanon, you have countries that at one point were much more sympathetic to Israel or vice versa. But then you have the Saudis and the Egyptians who are very concerned about Iran. So you see partnerships being made for the sake of their own safety.
Yeah, well, I think what happened to Turkey, what happened in Iran is a warning sign for Israel not to put too much credence in alliances with countries. You have to be self-reliant. Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni countries, I'm a little bit of a skeptic as to the long-term durability. I think that the relationship is driven by a balance between their animus towards Israel and their fear of Iran. And as long as the fear of Iran is greater than the animus towards Israel, they'll tend towards some sort of alliance, whether it's covert or overt. But once the balance changes, and if Iran is either defeated or gives up its nuclear ambitions, or is forced to give up its nuclear ambitions, and the regime change in Iran, and the level of fear of Iran goes down, you might find the level of animosity towards Israel increasing again. As I say, Turkey is. Was a very close ally of Israel. So
right.
It was, and as soon as the regime changes, the attitude towards Israel changes. I think it was the famous British politician Lord Palmerston who said that we have no permanent allies and we have no permanent friends. We only have permanent interests, and it's our interests that we have to serve. And so you can see that alliances change sometimes very quickly. And I think Israel has to be very careful about putting long-term trust in its alliances with its Muslim neighbors.
All right, now we're getting very close to an Israeli election. I'm not sure whether this election should have been called at all, but it is. It's costing the Israeli people a lot of money. What do you see as the outcome? Will Netanyahu be able to have his coalition? Does he have to bring in all kinds of people to secure that? What do you think about the up-and-coming election?
Well, according to most of the polls, he probably won't be able to set up a majority right-wing coalition because of the very strange behavior of Victor Lieberman. Lieberman, at the beginning of the campaign for the last elections, was in danger of not even getting into the Knesset. He managed to get through the threshold and had 5 seats. And that's what basically is, almost blackmail, is extortion, prevented Netanyahu from forming a right-wing government. And instead of being punished for his, I think, very bad behavior, he seems to be doing very well in the polls and has doubled his strength. And unless there's a big surprise, they may not be able to put together a government again this time, unless they go together with a broad-based coalition with the Blue and White Party, whose only real ideology seems to be anyone but Netanyahu. So the situation is very unclear at the moment, and I think there has to be a lot closer to the election day to make any well-based predictions.
Martin, who do you think would be an appropriate leader? This young Shakit, a young woman who seemingly is climbing in popularity in Israel. We haven't seen anyone since Golda Meir, as prime minister. Does she have any chance at all to sort of climb into that position at some point?
At some point, perhaps, but not in the foreseeable future, because she's not in the Likud, and I don't think her party will be in a position to present a candidate for prime minister. I certainly think that she's one of the better politicians around today in Israel. If Netanyahu isn't able to form a coalition, is either forced out for political reasons, I don't know what's going to happen with his legal problems. They'll probably have to find someone from within the Likud. The names being put about now are Gidon Saar, or maybe the former mayor of Jerusalem, Gil Barkat. But there's no obvious successor to Netanyahu at the moment. And Netanyahu's advantage has always been the alternative. Netanyahu has been in power now for 10 years. I think he's done a lot for Israel. I have my own criticisms of Netanyahu, but I certainly think he's been very unfairly treated by the press and the critics.
Right. I think there's a form of jealousy, not only here but in other parts of the world, when a leader has done so much for so long. Both the people and people who want to take his position are doing everything they can. I think he's the man for the time, Martin, because he has friends in different places and is making more friends around the world. What about Naftali Bennett? I mean, we've had him on in the past 3 or 4 times. Now there's no way you could get him on, whatever. Does he have the capabilities of being a good prime minister?
Well, I don't think he's on the cards at the moment. He had a very severe defeat in the last elections when his party didn't get through the threshold, very unsurprisingly. I thought they had a very good list. I've got a reasonably positive opinion about Naftali Bennett, but I think after his defeat, the chance of him becoming prime minister has been knocked back for a good amount of time. I think at the moment any successor, whether they're the most suitable or not, will come from the ranks of the Likud, not from a small party like Bennett or Shaked. I think that's just the political realities. I might think that Shaked is probably better suited than most people in the Likud.
But she's so young. She's so young. And what does she, that doesn't mean anything. She's a woman. She's very young. And yet you're saying somewhere down the road she may, take the leadership. What does she...
Sorry, go ahead.
What does she have to offer? I mean, what do we know about her that would make her another Golda Meir or better, if possible?
Well, I think she did a good job as Justice Minister. I think she identifies very well the strategic challenges Israel has, both domestically and internationally. I think she's very presentable as a politician. But again, I don't think that at the moment, unless she somehow manages to get into the Likud, that she has any chance of becoming prime minister in the foreseeable future, irrespective of whether I think she has the personal capabilities or not. Because I think the prime minister will be a combination of people who have the ability and the right political affiliation. I'm saying in the Likud, there don't seem to be really any outstanding candidates. And the Likud has grown to be the dominant party in the last few elections, mainly because of Netanyahu. If Netanyahu goes, the field might open up differently. We may have newcomers coming into the Likud. You may have other parties breaking up and joining the Likud. Within the blue and white, there are very diverse factions. You have the far left and the far right. You have at least 3 or 4 people there, like Bogi Alon, who used to be in the Likud. You have Yoaz Hendel, who's the right winger. You have Tzvi Hendel, who was a right-winger who could easily fit into the Likud. Their main objection to the Likud is it's led by Netanyahu, not any ideological objections. They have more ideological compatibility with the Likud than they do with many people in their own party.
Well, I think time will tell. I mean, Netanyahu, as you said, has had center stage for 10 years. He has a good relationship in most cases with the United States, and he seems to be making friends in many of the Arab countries. But what are we hearing? Iranian President Rouhani spoke with French counterpart Macron on Saturday, warning him Iran would take the next step in reducing its nuclear commitment unless Europe lives up to its own undertakings. Macron is not a very strong leader, and yet he's out for himself. So, what happens in a situation like that when you're, disconnected, like France and other places in Europe?
Well, given the sanctions, and if the United States maintains sanctions, of course, a lot depends on who's going to win the next election in the United States. But at the moment, you have to choose between commercial relations with the United States or commercial relations with Iran. And for most people, that's a pretty easy choice. So if the sanctions are tightened and France faces itself in a situation where its companies can either trade with the US or trade with Iran, I think they'll make the obvious decision and trade with the US rather than Iran.
So what do you consider to be the problems that Israel is facing at this point? They're facing Iran, they're facing so many different things, and yet seemingly they're successful. You're number 10 on the happiest list of people around the world, which a lot of people can't understand. I can. But you don't think the PR situation for Israel is as good as it could be?
No, I think it's dreadful. I think it's really dreadful. I think perhaps the two biggest threats facing Israel are, of course, the Iranian nuclear threat, together with the threat of the rocket capability, which they're trying to improve. But I think that the delegitimization of Israel on the international stage is no less of a threat, and that's connected with the Palestinian issue. I've always said, unless you can delegitimize the Palestinian narrative, you're going to have a very difficult task to re-legitimize the Zionist narrative, because these are two basically incompatible narratives. You can't really make them compatible. If you believe in the Palestinian narrative, you can't believe in the Zionist narrative, and vice versa. And so I think fighting the delegitimization of Israel is a big challenge.
Well, there are so many threats to Israel at this point from Hezbollah and Hamas, and the border attacks that we are hearing about. You're living it. We're just, listening to what's happening. What solution can you have? I mean, to most people who are in Israel proper, it seems like and is the safest country in the world to walk around at midnight and during any other time. But the borders are very frightening. And Israel is a small country. How can they keep the border safe and keep Israel safe?
Well, I think Israel has the military capability to keep itself safe at the moment. It spends relatively a great deal of money on defense, although as percentage of GDP it's gone down dramatically. At one stage we used to be about 19% of GDP, now it's only 5 to 6%. But I think many of the threats that have emerged towards Israel are the result of failed Israeli policy. For instance, Gaza, pulling out of Gaza. You now have Gaza, which is a strategic threat to much of Israel. which is a direct result of the Land for Peace doctrine. In many ways, in Lebanon as well, Israel withdrew in a very haphazard fashion from South Lebanon and basically left it as easy prey for the Hezbollah. And now you have these two strategic threats where extreme organizations have filled the vacuum that Israel left. And I think this is something that this is a mistake that Israel must not repeat, certainly on the Palestinian front in the east, which would leave the whole of the coastal plain under threat from what would basically become a giant Gaza. So I think that...
What's the solution? What do you consider it to a solution to be?
Well, that's the hot potato that you're throwing at me, and I don't want to do a disservice. I don't know how much time we have to talk about it. But in my opinion, the only solution that can address Israel's geographic imperatives and demographic imperatives as the nation state of the Jewish people is a widespread program of incentivized immigration for the Arab population, particularly the non-Israeli citizens in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. And if you ask yourself, if you don't adopt a program of incentivized immigration in Gaza, what's going to be the solution in 20 years? What's the solution for Gaza in 20 years? It just seems to be so logical. Even now, if you read the media reports, you say there's a great desire for the Gazans to leave and find a better and more secure life elsewhere. And I think that's something that Israel should facilitate. It's the only way that Israel can maintain strategically secure borders and a demographic composition that will allow it to endure the nation state of the Jewish people. Everything else a pipe dream. I think the two-state solution, like I said, will cause a mega Gaza overlooking Greater Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, and abut the Trans-Israel Highway. And a one-state solution which doesn't involve Arab immigration will turn Israel into Lebanon and be torn apart by ethnic strife.
Well, that is a situation that would take a very long time to discuss, and I'm not sure how the Arab population would feel about that, leaving the home that they consider to be theirs I must say that current polls show that there is a very widespread desire for them to leave. Well, I think safety is what is the most important thing, and my biggest concern right now, as I know is yours, is what's happening in Iran and Israel. Do you see a war? We have about 3 or 4 minutes left, Martin. What do you see happening in the next month?
Well, that's really a tricky question to answer, but things don't look good. There's a lot of ominous movement going on in the north. There's a lot of ominous movement going on in the south. And I think the greatest threat would be a coordinated strike against Israel by Hamas and Hezbollah together, which is something I've been worrying about for a long time. In the last engagement in 2014, fortunately, Hamas was engaged in the civil war in Syria and didn't really have the resources to turn against Israel. It's not the situation now, although Hezbollah has certainly been affected by the Iranian situation. But I certainly couldn't discount some kind of conflagration, and I hope Israel will, if something like that does erupt, I hope Israel will take decisive military action, not what it's done in the last 3 or 4 engagements, and allow the enemy to rearm and to redeploy.
What type of, how powerful are Hezbollah and Hamas? Are they not, Iranian force? These are people who are working within Syria and in the borders there. I mean, how much can Israel fight back? Do they have the capability? Would the United States come in to help them? What would happen?
Well, the United States has pledged its support for Israel. Whether they would commit boots on the ground, I'm not sure. Pretty doubtful. But most military experts think that Israel can overrun the Hezbollah and Hamas. It would probably be at great cost. But I think the biggest inhibition on the army at the moment has been political. Political correctness has been inhibiting the idea for much of the time. I think it's time that the IDF treats its enemies as the enemies and not as prospective peace partners.
Well, as much as Israel has to contain themselves with everything that's around them, I still think it's one of the safest places in the world to visit. And tourism seems to be increasing, whether it's the Christian community or the Jewish community. Israel seems to be a destination that is high up on the list.
Yeah, sure. I think in many ways Israel is a remarkable country. On just about every field of human endeavor, Israel's on the cutting edge of achievement, except perhaps with its political leadership, which is strange. But whatever field you think of, whether it's medicine, agriculture, communications, other forms of technology, Israel is certainly on the cutting edge of human endeavor. And one hopes that will be reflected in its endeavor to defend itself and its people.
Well, I think that the people like yourself in Israel, who are the brain power and the heart power, will be a part of anything that goes on. And I think Israel will survive and be successful. And we'll just pray that, that nothing happens in the next while. And hopefully we'll talk with you again. If we haven't talked to you, I wish you a very, very happy and healthy New Year and all the very best to you and your family, Martin.
Thank you, and to the listeners as well.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Much. Bye.
Bye.
Much. Bye.
Bye.
Much. Bye.